Hello everybody, welcome back to Alan Wall's Photography. This is Alan, and today we're going to dabble in Photoshop for a little while. Before we get started with today's interesting project, I want to tell you I have been so excited about today for about 2 weeks. It's a holiday in America, and I decided I would take a half-day holiday this afternoon, and I've been planning on where I want to go, what I want to photograph. It's a park, a state park near here that's a lovely place to visit. And I woke up this morning unable to move parts of my body. This has never happened to me before in all of the years that I took care of very, very sick people. I would hear people talking about how bad their back pain was almost every day. I've never had so much as a twinge of a sore back before, I don't think. And now I completely understand what they were talking about. This is monstrous. It's why I'm sitting in a wooden chair. It's the only way it eases up. I can't bend down and I can't stand up. Utter misery. So if you're one of my old patients and I didn't take your back pain seriously, I'm terribly sorry. I will from now on. Anyway, this is an interesting project we're doing today. It came about when one of the channel's viewers, Mrs. Jean Gran, from somewhere up in the northern hinterlands of America, she got in touch with me with a question. She was trying to photograph an orchid, which is a flower, so I don't know anything about it. And she was had some questions about how to do the focus stacking, what the best technique to use was, and several other questions. And as we talked back and forth, what she was looking for was a way to take this beautiful flower and photograph it and remove the background because it's a living flower, which is another thing I even know less about, is living flowers. And it was on part of a stem with other flowers that you could see. But she wanted those removed and wanted this one flower to be presented in such a way that it kind of blended seamlessly into the background, which is a very interesting artistic concept. I thought it would look great because the whites in this flower are really quite white. So I thought, well, what we could do was make a little project out of it. And Jean has been very gracious with her time, and seeing as we were far distant, remote in doing this, it took a lot of patience on her part to get all of the bits together. She started out by taking several photo-stacked images using a macro lens and using continuous lighting. The initial issues, and I can't put my hands on the very first pictures that she sent, but the one of the main problems was the darkness of the background. And if we were going to do this composite, I wanted a more even light. So we talked a lot about how to light the image, and this is her setup. This is what she came up with using her continuous studio lights to do this focus stacked image. She wasn't using flash, which is amazing because this looks like it was taken with flash. Very, very expert job of doing that. One of the crazy bits about this project was when she first sent me the picture, I was perplexed because she was focus stacking, but it looked to me like large areas on the petals were out of focus. So I said that to her, and she was very kind not to be annoyed at me and said no, that they were all in focus. And I looked at it again. I swear it looked out of focus to me. So we went back and forth until finally I took the photograph she sent and I blew it up as big as I could and tweaked the contrast on the photograph and realized what I was seeing as out of focus was the surface of the flower, which was in sharp focus, but it's semi-translucent, and the pigment areas underneath looked out of focus because of that. So I wasted tons of her time, which is this is my penance for that. I have to do the Photoshop stuff. So anyway, that was the deal. In fact, during this, while I was trying to figure out why she was having trouble getting the whole thing in focus, because everything she told me she was doing was exactly correct, I decided that I would go buy myself an orchid and photograph it so that I could get a feel for the issue she might be having, because I have the same camera and lens and everything that she was using. So I called around, and there is a shop about 5 miles from here that sells orchids. And this was before all of the current nonsense got started, so you could actually go to shops. And they said they had orchids and they had plenty of them. Now, normally, if I would buy flowers for my wife for some occasion, I had to buy them like within an hour of giving them to her, because they would die if I had them more than an hour. I can't even be in the same room as living plants. They all die. So I was so excited that they had orchids, and I had the studio all set up, and I ran down to the shop and asked where the orchids were. And this lady pointed me to a shelf that had pots, about 10 of them, 10 pots with brown sticks coming out of them. Nothing but a brown stick. And I thought the orchids had heard I was coming and had already died before I got there. But apparently, the way orchids work is there's a lot of faith that goes into buying them, because they're just a stick, and you have to love them and care for them for about 18 years, and then a blossom will come out and then die. But they look too close to already dead to me, and I didn't have that number of years to wait for a flower to pop out. So what we ended up doing was going back and forth with several different photographs, all of which were good, but I was looking for one in particular that would be perfectly framed for what we were doing, and she nailed it. She sent me the image that she used Xerine Stacker to stack, and the final image we selected was the DMAP output from Xerine Stacker. I can't remember how many images she said were in the stack. I think it was something like half a dozen. So it was a nice short stack, but she was shooting from quite far back, as you can see in her studio setup. And that was the starting image. And what we're going to do now is we're going to go over into Lightroom, do a few adjustments there, and then take this image into Photoshop and see if we can come up with a way to blend it seamlessly into its background in the way that Jean has been looking for. So let's go do that. So here we are in Lightroom, and this is the image that Jean and I decided would be the best one to use. As you can see, she has really nailed the background, lovely uniform white background, very easy for us to work with. Now the issues, the problems with doing this composite only become apparent when you get a really close look at the flower, and that is these areas of darkening, pigment, and streaks in the petals. I don't know anything about flowers, so I can't tell you exactly what that is, but it's going to make blending this seamlessly with a background a little bit more difficult. But the first thing we want to do is, this image was sent to me as a TIFF file and it hasn't been edited at all. So what I'd like to do is do a little bit of editing in Lightroom to get the flower looking the way we want it before taking it over to Photoshop. I'm just going to pull the highlights down and bring up the shadows to liven up the center of the flower here. Tweak the white point and the black point. Now it's very bright right now, but we'll be able to work with this when we get into Photoshop. I like this because it's really going to show us the areas that we need to work in. You can see why this photograph went back and forward several times between Jean and I, because I kept looking at it and saying, hey, this is out of focus. It's actually not. It's in pin sharp focus. There's just this layer of semi-transparent globularness on the leaf. But there you go. You live and learn. I was not aware of that. Anyway, I think that's about all we need to do. Maybe just ever so slightly increase the vibrance. I think that's good for now. We can always do more later on. So let's now take our flower over into Photoshop and begin the process of merging it. So we just double click on the image, right click on the image, and send to edit in Photoshop 2020. Now, it's going to ask whether or not you want to send it over with those Lightroom adjustments. Just leave it on yes and click edit. All right, so here we are in Photoshop, and there are a lot of different ways that something like this can be accomplished. One of the very basic ways you might want to approach this thing is just to paint out the dark areas, for example. We can see what that looks like if you want. So we'll make a copy of the background so we don't lose the original. And let's just take a brush. If you click on the Alt key while you have your brush active, it'll change to a dropper and it'll allow you to pick whatever color you want. So let's pick the color of the background here. And then with our brush painting on the same layer, we can paint away all of the stuff we don't want, including the edges of the flower. Now this might seem from a distance to be a really good, quick and easy way to do it, but it's not. It's not going to work at all. Really, all it's doing is moving the edge of the petal in. It's still an awful jump in contrast between the two. So we need to do something a little bit more subtle than this. What I'm going to do first is remove this flower from the background completely. And we're going to make a new background for it that we'll be able to work with, because this area up here will be difficult to work with because it has another flower behind it. So what I'm going to do is make another copy by hitting Command J. And then with that second copy highlighted, I'm just going to grab the quick selection tool. You know what? I'm going to do something else first. In order to make this a little bit easier to select, I'm going to go ahead and grab an adjustment layer. Brightness and contrast will be fine. I'll lower the brightness a little bit, increase the contrast, just to make this edge even more obvious, give the computer something easier to select. We're going to remove this again in a minute. And I'm just going to grab my quick selection tool, W on the keyboard, and select as much of the flower as I can. All you do with this tool is sweep it around the areas that you want included in the selection. And then the computer will think about it for a little minute, and then if it agrees with you, it'll put some marching ants around it like this. Now, we can clean up the edges to a certain extent just using the tool. It's actually pretty decent. But if we try to get clever with this and move the tool too close to the edge, especially in this area, it's going to have a tendency to jump across to the edge and select the whole bottom of the image. So we're going to just leave it there and hit select and mask to refine our selection. And this is a more accurate way to finish this up. There are several tools that you can use. I'm just going to use the brush. Now, wherever I paint with this brush, I am adding to the selection. This brush, if you look closely, has a little cross in the very center. So this is adding to the selection. When I overpaint with this and get off into the surrounding part, all I'll have to do is hit Alt and continue to paint to remove the parts right there that I was too aggressive with. By holding Alt, this will remove the mask. Now, in this area, we have these two areas that are air. They go right through the flower. And I didn't realize this until Jean pointed it out to me, but these are also holes that go all the way out to the back. So we're going to have to deal with them too. So let's continue to add, or I should say, refine the mask around the edges of the flower. This does not have to be incredibly accurate because we're going to be changing this whole edge. You'll see in a second. I'm just a little picky about getting it as close as I can. All right, let's just take care of these little areas. Use the bracket keys to make your brush larger or smaller as you see fit. That's good enough for now. Let's take care of these areas. We might actually be able to use the quick select tool right in here. So let's give it a try. No, it's selected a lot of the plant, but that'll be easy to fix. We can simply paint over it. But let's actually change to the paintbrush though. Well, I painted over it with the quick select tool and it did quite a good job. All right, let's do this other piece real quick. Go back to the quick select tool and hit the Alt key. All right, well, that's good enough. And there's just two other areas that we need to look at. This one and this one. So let me do those real quick. Make the tool a bit smaller, leave it on the quick select tool, hit the Alt key. You know what? It's good enough. Okay, fantastic. So now we want to have a quick look all the way around the edges just to make sure that we haven't skipped anywhere. There's another tool called the Refine Edge tool, the second one down. And if you're unsure if you have a good selection, you can just take that. If I can find the brush, there it is. If you just take the Edge Refine tool and drag it around the edge, it'll mess it up, so don't do it. It normally does a pretty good job of refining the edge, but I think this flower is unusual because of all of these semi-translucent parts of the of the petal. It's confusing the computer just like it confused me. All right, okay, so with the selection complete, one last look at it, make sure we're happy with it, and hit OK. Now that will put the marching ants of the selection around our flower. What I'm going to do is get rid of this brightness and contrast level to get us back to where we were, and I'm going to hit Command J to create a new layer on a transparent background. So that's how you cut something out in Photoshop, and now we're going to get into the real work of blending this into nothingness. So our goal is to have this flower blend seamlessly into the background. So the first thing we need to do is pick a background that is close to the color of the flower. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit the new layer button at the bottom, and we're going to fill this layer by going to Edit, Fill, and Color. And that will give us an eyedropper. And what I'm going to do is look over the flower, and I'm going to try to find a part that looks kind of representative of the rest of the color of the leaf, ignoring these dark areas. I don't want to click on these dark areas because that will give me a dark background. So as you look closely, you can see that there isn't very much of this black stranding in the middle of the petal. So I'm just going to pick a representative area. That looks good. It's a very, very light pink is the actual color, pinkish, and it'll look a little gray by itself. But we'll go ahead and hit OK, and hit OK to apply the fill. There you go, and it completely covers everything. So let's move it down below the cutout flower with the transparency. Okay, so that looks pretty good. The background is going to blend nicely with the base color of the petal. Now, we have two problems here. The first one is if we just erase the edge of the petal, which we could do with the erase tool, that is a destructive way of doing this, and destructive means you're throwing away the pixel data and you can't get it back. Well, you can, but it's not worth the hassle. Using the erase tool, let's bump it up to 100% so you can see what I'm talking about. If we then use the erase tool, we can remove the dark area at the edge of the petal, but again, it's not doing anything for these grayish streaks that are now just ending in a line at the end of the area I erased. So we need something more subtle. And what I found worked the best was to do this in two steps. The first thing I want to do is create a copy of the flower by, with that layer selected, hit Command J to make a copy. Whenever I do anything on the computer, on video, the chap next door starts up his lawnmower. It's absolutely guaranteed to happen. Okay, so this is the copy. Now what I'm going to do, the goal here is I am going to try to smooth out this transition so that it isn't just a cutoff like with the eraser tool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to blur this copy of the flower using the Gaussian blur. So I go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian blur, and what I want to do is add just enough blur so that we can no longer distinguish the tendrils of gray in the image. So 2.5 obviously isn't enough. We don't want to go crazy with it. I can still see the gray in the petals, so we need a bit more than that. Completely disappears around 26. So So this is now almost a solid color compared to the way it was. So we'll click OK. And now, obviously, we've destroyed our flower, so we don't want that effect of blur to be anywhere but in the intermediate area of the edges of the petal. So let's put a mask over that, and if we hold down the Alt key when we click the layer mask button, it'll lay down a black mask. Now, when you have a black mask over a layer, you can use a white brush to remove the mask. White reveals, black conceals. So the black mask is concealing the blurred layer. But if I now take my brush, B is the shortcut for brush, make sure that the color white is selected. This is not white. This is the color of the background, the foreground color. So what you need to do is hit D on your keyboard. That'll reset this to black and white. We have the brush selected. I'm going to drop it down to an opacity of about 50% and use a soft round brush. So now with the mask lit, I can paint over these areas where the black streaks are visible, and it's very subtle, but they're disappearing when I do this, and instead leaving behind a much more uniform transition. It's like the streaky parts just bleed into this smoother, slightly blurred area, and that's exactly what I'm trying to accomplish. And I'm going to do this all the way around. Where it's heavier, I'm going to go in a little bit further. I've got this set on just 50%, only to speed up time. I'd probably normally do this around 20% and just add layers to build this up. Now, so that it doesn't look odd, I'm going to continue this effect even into the overlapped parts so that it looks like the entire petal has this softening towards the edge. This is an area that's going to be a bit tough, partly because there's a yellow color here. I haven't decided what to do about that yet. But when we get all the way down here, I'm going to focus on adding that blur where the purple parts aren't. I'm going to leave this area exactly the way it is. Well, all right, now we can see the streaky areas coming back in again. So we'll increase the size of the brush using the bracket keys and keep on going around. And this is not removing the color. That's important. Though the grayish color caused by the streaks is still here. It's just blurred in with the rest of the petal color. It's really pronounced up here. You can really see how difficult this would be to blend in, because these streaks would just stop at the line. But we can smooth it all out. And again, I'm going to carry it on over at the overlap to make it look more natural. Up here's a little bit difficult. I don't want it to be too obvious, and I don't want it to be too sudden of a cutoff. So I am going to add some blur around the edge, just not a whole lot. So you see what I'm doing? I'm applying the blur that I put over the whole image, and I'm just sparingly using it around the edges only. I think this was where we started. It's close enough. Okay, so you can see by looking at it now, those areas of black are much less obvious in most parts of it. Now we're going to go on to the second part of this. And by the way, if you look at the mask, you can see where we've covered the whole periphery of the flower. I'm not going to do anything in these little holes down here because they're brightly colored and we want those to stay the same. So part two is to now create a transition between the edge and the background. And ideally, it's going to be in the form of a gradient going from the slightly darker area to the lighter area without an obvious transition zone. So what I'm going to do to accomplish that is create another blank layer. And onto this layer, I am going to paint some of the background color. And I'll show you what I mean. I hit B for my brush again. Okay, so my brush is now set to the color of the background. And what I want to do here is change the blending mode. And this is important. First of all, I'm going to drop the opacity down to about 20%. And I am going to change the blending mode of the whole layer to lighten. So with the layer selected, go to the drop-down menu and hit lighten. Now, what this means is, as I paint onto this new layer, it's only going to lighten the areas that are darker than it. That's a really important concept, because if I just painted a white color onto here, it would also lighten the background. We don't want it to lighten anything but the dark pigmented areas. So with this in lighten, and we can leave the opacity at 100%. As I paint over the edge now, it's going to apply the background color, but only to the darker pixels. Now, I would use this opacity and just take my time doing this, but just for the sake of expedience, I'm going to bump it up to 60%, and you'll be able to see much faster what I'm talking about. So all we're doing here is adding the light color to the dark parts of the edge of the petal. Now where that yellow was, I'm just going to paint that out, meaning put the background color right over the top of it. I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to do very little around this bottom area. It's okay to paint a little bit of this background color over the purple parts down here. It makes it look a little bit more realistically like it's sinking into the milk or whatever this is supposed to be. You can see here how the effect is only affecting the dark pixels. And you can use this same technique for all kinds of blending when you're doing a composite. If you're trying to make something disappear into a background. If it was a dark background, of course, you'd want to use darken or multiply as opposed to lighten as your blending mode. Well, I'm going to finish up the edges of this and make make it all pretty, but you can see the effect is pretty, well, we definitely need some work around here. And I'll go on and do that. But the blend is really quite convincing. So let me finish this up, and I will be right back with you. All right, so I have been over this carefully, and it's looking pretty good. It's quite convincing. Your eye wants to see an edge here, but if you zoom in, there really isn't one. What we've managed to accomplish is have this granular, grayish tint gradually fade until it's completely gone. And that's by very carefully using a soft brush to apply the effect in layers. And there are, like I say, there are other ways of doing this. You can do it with other blend modes, but this I find to be the most helpful way. And because it's non-destructive, we can go back in and change the amount of blur on the blur layer. We can remove the layer that we painted the edges with. Yeah, it's all still available in the various layers. And like I say, this is a useful way to go about any kind of seamless blending. So when we're satisfied that we have everything the way that we want it, we can just right click on the layers and hit flatten image, and I will save that, and I will see you outside of the computer in about 1 second. So a huge thank you to Jean Gran for contributing this idea and her work and her photographs to make this little project possible. If this is something that interests you and you would like to see more of these mini projects that rely on using some new tools in Photoshop, then please let me know. I will be happy to do more of these. I do this stuff all the time, so I'd be more than welcome to do another collaborative project or two with anybody out there who has some specific look that they're trying to get and wants to work with me on doing that. That would be fun. A couple of other announcements. I have modified my macro cage, and a couple of folks have been communicating with me about, well, in fact, a dozen or so people have been communicating with me about the modifications they'd made to theirs. So I think we're going to revisit the cage sometime soon to look at what I've done and what some other folks have done, just to give you ideas of how you might want to work if you're putting together a platform or a cage to shoot with. I've got some other thanks I want to make today and let you know about one other change. First of all, to all of my Patreon supporters, thank you so much. Your generosity makes all of this possible. Thank you to Ronald Bell, who has become a Patreon supporter as of the last video. Welcome, Ronald. And an especially big thank you to Alan Recktenwald, the inventor of the bendy arm specimen holder, and Andrew Johnson. Both of these fine people want to support the channel but did not want to do so through Patreon, which I certainly can understand. It was Andrew who very kindly suggested that I put a mechanism in place where others who want to do that, who would like to support what we're doing, but don't want anything to do with Patreon, there is now a donation page on my website, www.alanwallsphotography.com, under donations. I have almost enough questions and comments from the last half dozen videos to put together a video answering those questions, so that'll be coming up pretty soon. There's one other thing I want to mention. We don't have a way to communicate with one another. And I think that we need that, or I think it could be a valuable resource. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a Discord account just for this group, so that when there are interesting topics to be discussed, that they can be discussed amongst the group. And of course I'll be present a lot as well. But I think it's a good way to make connections with other people who share your interests around what we do on this channel. So I'm going to work on that, and as soon as I figure it all out, I'll get things going, and then I'll make some kind of announcement or send out an email to everybody. So look out for that in the near future. Thank you so much, as always, for joining me. I hope this was at least a little bit interesting. Thanks again to Jean Gran for helping me do this project, and I will see you in just a couple of days. Until then, stay safe, be well.